Alright guys, and welcome to today's video. We're going to be doing some home workout stuff. We're going to be answering the question, how much muscle can you build at home using only your body weight and resistance bands? Okay, so no equipment whatsoever. Now to answer this question, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a whole load of exercises that you can do at home using only your body weight and bands and discuss some of the pros and cons. Now when it comes to building a pretty decent sized chest, I would say you could do so just by doing different variations of push-ups or press-ups. So just by changing the angle of your torso, whether your feet be elevated or not, hand positioning and so on, you'll be able to hit your upper, mid and lower pec. Since you're using your own body weight as a form of resistance, you should be able to provide enough of an overload to stimulate muscle growth. You could also introduce a band to try and mimic the chest fly exercise, which although not ideal, is still better than nothing. Moving on to shoulders, you've got pressing exercises such as the Pike Press Up, which is a relatively easy one, not providing a huge amount of overload, and then the Handstand Press, which is on the other end of the spectrum, which is going to be very challenging, lots of overload. So you'll be hitting your front delts with these exercises, but without bands or equipment, it's going to be tough to hit the mid delts. This is where the bands come into play and can actually be really useful at helping to grow the mid and rear delts. Now, since muscles like the mid delts are relatively small compared to everything else, they don't need a huge amount of overload in terms of resistance in order to initiate growth. So using high reps, slow tempo and different variations of lateral raises, I would say you could actually build a pretty decent set of shoulders. You could try and be creative and do an overhead band press to try and replicate the dumbbells, but honestly I would say that's just not really enough resistance to have much of an effect at growing your shoulders. Moving on to your back, this one's going to be a little bit of a tough one, I would say. You really are going to struggle to develop your lats and your mid back using only your body weight. If you can get yourself a pull-up bar, you really will be able to take things to the next level, because that way you can use your body weight. And just by changing the angle of your torso, you'll be able to hit your lats and your mid back. So pull-up bars would be a really good addition to help take your back and even bicep development to the next level. But for now, if you don't have that, there are these exercises which you can do using a band, but unfortunately they're not going to really provide you with enough resistance to get a big, juicy, thick back with a nice V taper. You're going to need additional resistance in order to do that. Moving on to arms, so biceps and triceps, I would argue that with all the pressing you're doing using your own body weight, with the push-ups and dips, you could develop pretty decent triceps. On the other hand, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to grow big biceps using your body weight without the use of a pull-up bar. You can try and use bands and replicate curling movements, but honestly, I would say that these would give you more of an arm pump than anything. It's really not going to provide you with a huge amount of overload to give you big, juicy biceps. So it's really just another reason why getting a pull-up bar is going to be beneficial. If you don't have it and you're just doing all these bodyweight exercises and band exercises at home, I would imagine you'd develop a pretty uneven arm. You'd have reasonably developed triceps, but your biceps would be pretty much non-existent. When it comes to trap development, you are going to be pretty limited here without any equipment. You can't really do much with only your body weight. You can use bands, particularly very resistant bands, to try and develop some form of trap, particularly if you're doing high rep, slow tempo and holding the squeezes, but you are going to be fairly limited here at home unless you buy some heavy dumbbells and do shrugs with them. If we move on to the lower body and take a look at the posterior chain, hamstrings and glutes, you can be creative here and you can see a pretty decent amount of muscle development, especially when it comes to doing single leg exercises. Since you're going to be using the majority of your body weight as resistance and placing that resistance onto one leg, you should be able to see some decent development. A lot of these exercises can not only help with building muscle, but help to improve your balance and also just to improve the mind-muscle connection. So when you're actually doing exercises in the gym, if you're struggling to feel the muscle engaging, doing a lot of these exercises at home with not as much resistance, you actually learn how to properly lengthen, shorten and contract the muscle. If you compared your upper body and your lower body and you were to track the amount of muscle development that you would see just by training at home, I would argue that you'd probably see more development in your lower body due to the greater number of exercises which you can do and the amount of overload you can actually supply upon each leg. I would argue that your upper body is going to struggle a little bit. You might be able to see some decent tricep, chest and front delt development, but your back and rear delts, traps and so on are going to struggle. if we were to look at the lower body, I would say that the potential for muscle development is fairly evenly distributed between the posterior and anterior chain. So this is assuming that you're selecting the right exercises, but you should be able to see decent development of your quads, glutes, and hamstrings. And you'll definitely be able to see a pretty significant amount of development if you stick to those single leg exercises and if you really slow down the tempo and actually make it pretty disgusting. I mean, I don't normally do wall sits, but when I did a wall sit for this video, my quads were literally shaking. When it comes to executing all of these exercises and doing some kind of a routine and building muscle, my advice would be to keep the tempo slow, okay? One of the main principles of overloading the muscle is obviously lifting more weight. But since you're working out from home, this is going to be difficult. You can't just suddenly make your body heavier, and the bands are only going to supply you with a fixed amount of resistance. So you're going to need to overload your muscles in different ways, and there are ways to do this. You could either use an explosive tempo, or you could really slow down the tempo. You could increase the rep range, you could do supersets, you could reduce the rest period, you could even just become a hell of a lot more efficient at maintaining the tension on the working muscle. And when it comes to building your abdominal muscles, since they're relatively small, they don't require a huge amount of overload in order to grow them. So you can do this quite comfortably at home. If you want to watch a full home ab workout video, then click the link in the description. So those are the exercises and my thoughts on them. Obviously there's more exercises which you can do at home, but there's a good selection for you to do. Now, how much muscle you build is largely going to be dependent upon how much resistance you can place on that muscle. Now, some of these exercises you can place quite a lot of resistance on them, you know, say for example the push-ups and the single leg exercises, but a lot of them you are going to struggle, particularly with some of the rowing movements and bicep curls where you can only use bands. If you had a pull-up bar, you would be able to take things to the next level, but ultimately you are going to be quite limited with how big you can get with just using your body weight and resistance bands. You know, I didn't build my physique from doing home workouts and band work. You know, I had to go to the gym to build this physique, but you can still build an athletic one, okay, a nice looking one. You can burn calories, you can make those exercises challenging, particularly if you're on the move or you can't have access to a gym, you know, if there's no gym in your area at a particular point in time. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys soon.